There is a conflict. There are conflicts. There are 4 types of wars that happen simultaneously. What will happen in the markets and the economy? The unit is the family. I grew up in America, which was a land of opportunity for me. If you look at it through history, when there's existing world powers and there's rising of a challenging power, there is a conflict. There are conflicts. And they've led to wars. In the last 500 years, that's happened 16 times. And in 12 of those times, there were wars. There are 4 types of wars that happen simultaneously. We always think shooting each other and sending people and bodies into wars and that kind of war. But they all have 4 types of wars. They have a trade war. Mm-hmm. They often start with a trade war, 1930s, Smoot-Hawley tariffs. There is a technology war. There is a geopolitical war, like is happening with China. What will it mean for Asia, Asian countries? And there's a capital war. Well, it's not happened before. You have to go back to World War II. And in World War II, and in a number of wars that other countries have had, they have a capital war, which means that they could say, you know those $1 trillion of bonds that you own? Well, we're not going to pay you, or we're going to do this or that. These types of wars. But I just wanted to make clear that at number 3, so these are factors.
Sure.
1, wealth and political gap, extreme. Number 2, monetary policy can't. So if we have a downturn and they're at each other's throats, serious. Number 3, the conflict with China. These things have played out. So now when you look at why is politics more important today than it was? Because that will determine in the markets what will happen in the markets and the economy, right? And number 1, that wealth gap. Who you elect will have a big economic and market impact. Number 2, the absence of monetary policy will have a big market impact as to what will be done. And number 3, this geopolitical war, which involves those 4 things, technology and so on, will have a big impact. So that's why it's more important than ever. There is a hierarchy, and in most large companies in the United States, you would not have a vote and an election as to who's operating it. And so it's a top-down kind of management in which the government is working in the coordination of its private sector and its public sector.
Extremely involved.
Right. Exactly. And they would say, it seems so crazy not to be. I mean, so a leader of China described it as follows, okay? The essence of the difference between the United States and China is what is the unit that matters. In the United States, it is the individual. It is individualism, and it is the individual. And everything is bottom up. You know, it's the entrepreneur, you elect your government from bottom up, and so on. So it's a bottom up type of process. Companies are put together by people who all want to make money together. They find it and they come together and they make it bottom up, but it's bottom up. If you want to build a highway, okay, individual property rights will matter a lot more in the United States. So an individual can almost stand in the way of that highway beam. If you have a mission to get something done, individuals can stand in the way or facilitate it. So that's bottom up. And he said in China, the unit is the family. And if you understand Confucianism is for China what Judeo-Christian roots is for the United States. Since 1984, they have increased their incomes by an average of 26 times. They've gone from 2% of GDP to 22% of GDP. They had a poverty rate, which was 88%. It's now gone to less than 1%. They have lengthened the life expectancy by 10 years. I'm not saying which has gone better or not, but I'm saying they believe, and when you look at it, that process is a logical process and it works well. And so that is the one that they're operating by. I grew up in America, which was a land of opportunity for me. And this goes back to what I'm saying in terms of it's got to be a land of opportunity. But I grew up and all I had were two parents who loved me, and I went to a public school. And I believe in this opportunity and that element of those types of freedoms to create that opportunity. Right now in the United States, we have a problem in the public education system in terms of the quality. Certain areas which can't receive basic funding for basic things, the most basic things, because money doesn't get to them. They would say, well, that would be intolerable. How do we deal with it? We have our own problems. So that each has elements of pros and cons. They could say, listen, having my companies work with my government, each can operate by its rules within its domain. Sure. However, it doesn't work that way. I would say the biggest issue in the United States is how do we be as great as we can be? And that's where my greater worry is, because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is if we are as strong and capable as we can be and as great as we can be, we will be good for ourselves and we will be good for the world and best in the event of any conflict. And that my worry is more about that, okay, than anything else. Everything needs to look at its problems and say, what are its problems, and change. And if it doesn't look at its problems and change, it is in danger of dying. There are certain outcomes. And those outcomes are things like, is this a country of the things I grew up with? Is this a country of equal opportunity? Can we share the notion? What is our overarching principle? I think this is a country in which it was fabulous in being able to bring people without prejudice from anywhere in the world, and they can really be citizens here in a way where, based on their opportunity and their good behavior. But in addition, the thing that I grew up with, and I always believed was most important, was equal opportunity. So if I would say, what is America? It's a country of equal opportunity. And circumstances have changed. This was not because of evilness of anybody, but circumstances have changed, having to do with combination of things, having to do with technologies replacing jobs in certain types of jobs, having to do with going global and the workforce being a global workforce where others will, in those jobs, produce it outside the United States and bring it in. Having to do with monetary policy, which means that central banks buy financial assets, which benefits those who have financial assets relative to those. Having to do the way the Constitution is even written as regarding who is responsible for education, a state issue by the Constitution, and it is, and so then you would say, as I examined in this, I just wanted to see the differences. So I carved it away. I want to look at what the bottom 60% of the population, what their lives are like, and separated it from the top 40% because the averages are misleading. And really, that's almost like an 80-20 thing. In other words, the bottom 80% relative to the top 20, because that other group is basically similar to the bottom. And it's not an environment in which we can say that we are striving well for equal opportunity. Okay, opportunity. Because in that top 40%, the average per capita amount of money spent on a child's education is 5 times that in the lower 60%. And so if you look at the outcomes, not put the outcomes of income aside for a bit, but just even deal with productivity and usefulness. And you look at the tragedy of not being able to get adequate number of books in places or adequate teachers. And then you say, is that productive and is it fair? It's not productive because you're losing an education of a large percentage of the population, the proper education, the proper care. We also have family issues. Families are breaking apart. In other words, like I said, I had the benefit of 2 parents who loved me and took care of that. In some of these cases, that you have a problem of that there's not good family guidance, and that's a whole social issue, but it becomes a spiral. And so I think the question is, are we going to look at that well, and how do we deal with it in a non-partisan, non-ideological ideological way, right?